So, as I said, we'll be looking at God's protection as shown to us in Genesis chapter 46. The story of Joseph, it's almost over. We've almost reached the end of our time with Joseph here. Only, I think, one or two more chapters left. But this has been really the theme of Joseph's life, the theme of what we see out of Joseph, what we're told about Joseph in the Bible here, is God's protection. And you might look at it and say, God's protection is that this man was sold into slavery by his own brethren at 17 years of age, that he was made into a slave, that he was accused and wrongfully convicted of a crime and sent to prison for 2 years, that even after he interpreted the dream and helped out the butler and the baker, the butler still forgot about him? Yes. That was all, God's hand was in all of that. Nothing happened to him that God didn't allow. Nothing happens in our lives that God doesn't allow. Warren Wiersbe wrote, "The safest place in all the world is in the will of God, and the safest protection in all the world is the name of God. Because if I have his name stamped on me, nobody else can touch me unless he says so." And Jolene, sometimes talks about when she was younger, 4th, 5th grade, and she was attending public school at the time, and sometimes some of the kids were mean to her. Until one day her big brother showed up and beat the snot out of him. And everybody left her alone after that. She had the name of her brother stamped on her after that point, and everybody says, "No, I don't want none of that." Well, God is much more powerful than any of us could ever hope to be. And if we've got his name stamped on us, nobody else can touch us. So Israel, he took his journey with all that he had and came to Beersheba and offered sacrifices to the Lord of his father Isaac. And then God spoke to Israel in the visions of the night and said, "Jacob, Jacob." And he said, "Here I am." So he said, "I am God, the God of your father. Do not fear to go down to Egypt, for I will make of you a great nation there. I will go down with you to Egypt, and I will also surely bring you up again. And Joseph will put his hand on your eyes." Then Jacob arose from Beersheba, and the sons of Israel carried their father Jacob, the little ones and their wives, in the carts which Pharaoh had sent to carry them. So, Jacob, Israel, he was a bit nervous at the idea of going down to Egypt, because he knew that this hadn't always been the best thing in the world for his people. But what's he do? He sets out for the trip anyways, and then he stops in Beersheba, the same place where his father and his grandfather had stopped and made offerings to the Lord and had spoken to by the Lord. And he makes an offering to the Lord, and God speaks to him. In fact, this is the same place that Jacob had stopped and made offering to the Lord and received the vision of the ladder before he went to Paddan Aram. So both times when he's leaving the promised land, he stops in Beersheba and God speaks to him. God reconfirms his promise to him and says, "Don't worry, I'm going to make a great nation of you. And I will bring you back out of there. Don't be scared to do this. Don't be scared to follow what I'm telling you to do." David Guzik wrote of it, saying, "Israel's grandfather Abraham planted a tamarisk tree in Beersheba many years before, and had called on the name of the Lord there," in Genesis 21:33. Isaac received a special promise from God and built an altar for sacrifice there, calling on the name of the Lord, in Genesis 26:24 and 25. And it was probably at this very place that Israel sacrificed. So we look at God's timing and his confirmation. God makes sure that we know what the step is, but he also expects us to kind of step out in faith a little bit. You notice that God didn't give him a vision before he sent Benjamin out. He just had to take that step of faith and say, you know what? God is in control. God, I trust you. You're in control of this. If I'm bereaved, I'm bereaved. But here, God actually speaks to him and confirms for him that he's making the right move. And this was a big thing for him because Abraham went to Egypt during a time of famine, kind of like right now. Israel is in a time of famine again and is getting ready to go to Egypt. Well, Abraham went to Egypt during a time of famine. It was counted to him as being a lack of faith. It wasn't a good thing. It wasn't what he was supposed to do. So you look at that and you say, well, my grandpa went for the same reason, and it was negative. It was a lack of faith on his part. Maybe I'm not supposed to go. Then his father was told not to go into Egypt. And so, looking at his history, looking at what he knows, he shouldn't be going to Egypt right now. But God gives him the confirmation. God gives him the vision and tells him, don't be afraid to go. But also, he knows the prophecy that was given in Genesis chapter 15, verse 13, where God told Abraham that his descendants will be strangers in a land that is not theirs and will serve them, and they will afflict them 400 years. And so when God speaks to him and he says, I will go down with you to Egypt, and I will surely bring you up again. And he says to him, I will make of you a great nation there. God is directly answering that prophecy. And he's not necessarily saying, don't worry, I was just joking. You're not going to be afflicted. You're not going to be servants there and slaves there. No, he's saying, have faith. No matter what happens, I'm going with you, and I'll bring you back out again. But what's different? He has all these reasons why he shouldn't go to Egypt. But God appeared to him and gives him confirmation. He tells him, don't worry, I'm going with you. Don't be afraid to go. And the next 23 verses are a listing of the names of every single person that went to Egypt with Joseph or Jacob. And so I skipped those because it was a lot. But now we see, starting at verse 28, he sent Judah before him to Joseph to point out before him the way to Goshen. And they came to the land of Goshen. So Joseph made ready his chariot and went up to Goshen to meet his father Israel. And he presented himself to him and fell on his neck and wept on his neck a good while. And Israel said to Joseph, now let me die, since I have seen your face, because you are still alive. Now Joseph here, we've seen the 7 years of plenty. We've seen the 13 years of slavery and prison time. It's been a good 20 years since Jacob has seen his son. A good chunk of those years, he thought that his son was dead. And so they're an emotional reunion. And Joseph said to his brothers and his father's household, I will go up and tell Pharaoh, and say to him, my brothers and those of my father's house who are in the land of Canaan have come to me. And the men are shepherds, for their occupation has been to feed livestock. And they have brought their flocks, their herds, and all that they have. So it shall be, when Pharaoh calls you and says, what is your occupation? That you shall say, your servant's occupation has been with livestock from our youth, even till now. Both we and also our fathers, that you may dwell in the land of Goshen. For every shepherd is an abomination to the Egyptians. It reminds me of Marie Antoinette. Right before she was beheaded, she had a castle at Versailles. It was a gorgeous castle, but that was her country retreat. That was where she went away to play shepherdess. She had a flock of sheep there that she would go and tend to when she wanted to pretend that she wasn't a queen, that she was just a regular person. Mind you, she did that in a castle with giant manicured fields, and because sheep are stinky, which Kim can attest to, she perfumed her sheep. She had a flock of perfumed sheep that she'd go and pretend she was just a regular old person with. And here the Egyptians think that shepherding, that being a shepherd is an abomination. Why? They probably smell as bad as their sheep. They didn't have showers and time away. They would live out there in the field with the sheep. And we already know the Egyptians were kind of weirdo clean freaks. Shaved all their hair because hair was dirty. But then they'd wear a wig so they'd still have hair, which the wig is probably actually made of hair, I don't know. But they didn't want to be around shepherds for various reasons. And so what does Joseph say? Tell them that you're shepherds. Why is that? Because it keeps them separated from the Egyptians. They can go have their land, and the Egyptians aren't going to come hang around them and influence them and bring their own pagan worship into the people of Israel. They're not going to intermarry with them, which, if we look throughout their history in Canaan, was an issue. They repeatedly intermarried with the people of Canaan. They repeatedly followed after the Canaanite gods. And going forwards, once they get back to the Promised Land, it's going to be a recurring issue still. So Joseph tells them, tell them that you're a shepherd. So Joseph went and told Pharaoh and said, my father and my brothers, their flocks and their herds and all that they possess, have come from the land of Canaan. And indeed, they are in the land of Goshen. He took 5 men from among his brothers and presented them to Pharaoh. And Pharaoh said to his brothers, what is your occupation? And they said to Pharaoh, your servants are shepherds, both we also and our fathers. And they said to Pharaoh, we have come to dwell in the land, because your servants have no pasture for their flocks, for the famine is severe in the land of Canaan. Now therefore, please let your servants dwell in the land of Goshen. One way that we see God's protection is right here. The famine drove them out of Canaan to go live in Egypt. It drove them away from the corrupting influences of Canaan. Sometimes God will take you and say, you know what? Job's gone, you just lost your house, now you got to move over here. Why? Because you were getting into some bad stuff where you were. God will sometimes draw you away from a place, and it's not always going to be God saying, hey, I prepared the way, make it nice and easy, and move over here. Sometimes, he needs to give us a little extra motivation. And then on top of that, as I already pointed out, because the Egyptians hate shepherds, now they're not going to be influenced by the Egyptians either. We look at Joseph, and he's been living with the Egyptians for 23-ish years at this point. And he's held steady, even being married to the daughter of a high priest. He has stayed steady with God. But we've also seen his brothers aren't quite so steady. So God is protecting his people by moving them. He's protecting them by separating them. As Christians, we're called to be set apart, to be separated from this world. That doesn't mean we go off in our own little commune and set up, cut ourselves off and ignore the rest of the world. But it means that when the rest of the world looks at us, we should be different. When the rest of the world goes out to get drunk on a Friday night, we shouldn't. When the rest of the world goes and does whatever, we're set apart, we're separate from the things that the world is doing. We may not always want to be separated. We might say, well, I'm comfortable here. I like what I'm doing. I want to stay with what I'm doing and where I've been. But God is, if he's trying to move you, if he's trying to separate you, then we need to listen because it's our protection. And Pharaoh spoke to Joseph, saying, your father and your brothers have come to you. The land of Egypt is before you. Have your father and brothers dwell in the best of the land. Let them dwell in the land of Goshen, and if you know any competent men among them, then make them chief herdsmen over my livestock. And Joseph brought in his father Jacob and set him before Pharaoh, and Jacob blessed Pharaoh. I find that a very interesting one. Jacob coming here, being blessed and honored by Pharaoh by being given the best of the land of Egypt. Jacob blesses Pharaoh. Pharaoh, the guy that they believe to be a god. But Jacob, the follower of the true God, just blessed their false god. But you notice he also says, if you know any competent men among you, make them chief herdsmen over my livestock. All the livestock owned by Pharaoh, owned by Egypt itself, are now going to be watched over by Israel, by Joseph's brothers. And the next passage I read next week, not today, the next week, that's going to be even that much more important. I'll give it away. Next week, he's going to end up selling grain to the people of Egypt in exchange for all their livestock. So all the livestock would now be owned by the Egyptian government, by Pharaoh, and his brothers who are the ones watching all of Pharaoh's livestock. Now you wonder, could this possibly be kind of the start of some of the anti-Semitism out there? Because what is one of the stereotypes? Oh, they control everything. They run all the money. Well, here, because of Joseph's leadership, Pharaoh was going to come to own everything. And eventually, even the very people themselves would become owned by Pharaoh. But the people of Israel are now in charge of all of the livestock in all of Egypt. And you look and you see these guys from Canaan brought in, they're shepherds, they're gross, they're disgusting, we hate them. But they're given the best of the land. You can't tell me that didn't make some of the Egyptians a bit frustrated. That they show up and just because they're Joseph's family, who himself is a dirty Canaanite, who is in charge of everything, that now they get the best. Oh, just a thought that popped into my head right now. Because we know that Satan, since the beginning, has wanted to eradicate God's people. I mean, he started it all the way back in Eden when God only had 2 people. So I can see kind of sowing the seeds to lead to all the strife that Israel has had to deal with since. So moving on, Pharaoh said to Jacob, how old are you? And Jacob said to Pharaoh, the days of the years of my pilgrimage are 130 years. It's pretty old at this point. Few and evil have been the days of the years of my life, and they have not attained to the days of the years of the life of my fathers and the days of their pilgrimage. So Jacob blessed Pharaoh and went out from before Pharaoh. Jacob recognizes he hasn't always been the greatest guy. Few and evil have been the days of my life. You know, it's fairly recently that he fully actually committed himself to God, that he became Israel instead of Jacob. But you look and say, few have been the days of the years of my life. You're 130 years old. Even in those days, that was pretty old. But he's being humble, I guess. So when Joseph situated his father and his brothers, and gave them a possession in the land of Egypt, in the best of the land, in the land of Ramesses, as Pharaoh had commanded. Then Joseph provided his father, his brothers, and all his father's household with bread, according to the number in their families. So Joseph gets them all set up. They're watching over Pharaoh's livestock. And they got the best of the land. They went from living in Canaan, surrounded by evil influences, by corrupting influences, to living in the best of Egypt, separated from all those influences. And now we're going to look at how exactly this really lines up with being God's protection over them, and how we can look at that as how God will also protect us. I always like this verse. The name of the Lord is a strong tower. The righteous run into it and are safe. If you're righteous, you've got a strong tower. You've got your protection. You have defense. Run to God. Run to his name and be safe. Now we see it took over 20 years to get Joseph where he needed to be to save his family. It probably wasn't a pleasant 20 years for Joseph, but he didn't lose his faith. He stayed faithful to the Lord. And we see that they're now in Egypt. Egypt separated themselves already from other nations. They saw other nations being beneath them. We're Egypt, we're awesome, you guys are not. And so there was no influence from other nations being brought into Egypt at this point. So by them moving into Egypt, they're cut off from the influence of other nations as well. By them being shepherds, they're cut off from the influence of Egypt. Throughout all this, all the evil that was accomplished by his brothers while they were still in Canaan. You say, well, why didn't God just do this a lot sooner? Why did God wait till after Levi and Simeon killed all those people? Why did he wait till after Judah was a jerk? Why did he just say, you know what, I'm going to move these guys over here now, let them be cut off from the bad influences so that they don't have to go through all that? Well, God sees time differently than us. He plays the long game. A lot of times we look ahead, we see the short game. I look out and I say, well, if you just like cut this out, like get rid of this guy, it makes my life easier and life will be better. But God says, don't worry, I got that guy there for a purpose. Eventually you're going to see it. And I've shared numerous times about moving from New York to Arizona to the Marine Corps to hating this place. Now I live in this place. And I wouldn't change any of it. I wouldn't, God put me where he needed me to be, but at each of those steps, I was like, I'm not so sure about this, God. Or driving a semi. I used to drive a big rig over the road. And it's a completely different experience from driving a car. In a car, you use the 3-second rule. You wait for somebody to pass an obstacle and count 3 seconds, and that's how far back you should be before you pass it. In the truck, you want to be at least 10 seconds. The truck, I want to be looking, you're looking down, half a mile. I need to be looking 5 miles down the road, as far down the road as I can see. Because if I'm in a fully loaded truck that weighs 80,000 pounds and it takes me about 300 some odd feet to stop from 55 miles an hour compared to a car that takes 100 feet. And so a lot of times, you'll be driving behind a big rig and he'll start slowing down, or he'll get over even though there's nobody in front of him. You can say, why is this guy getting over? What's his deal? Why is he doing this? Because he's looking way out there and he sees something coming up. He sees an obstacle. I would often get over way before I came across a police officer on the side of the road to give him space, because I'm looking up ahead. I see the cop way up there with somebody pulled over, and I look in my mirror and I see a bunch of cars coming up. So I got over because I wanted to be sure that I was in the right spot when I passed that officer and I didn't put him at risk. Or if I'd waited, those cars would all be next to me, and they don't let trucks over. And that's how God looks at our lives. He sees it all. He sees the beginning from the end. He doesn't look and say, well, let's do this right now and see what happens. God's looking way down the line, and he says, I'm going to let this happen right now because over here, it's going to put them in the right spot. What's our role in this? Is it to question him? Is it to understand what he's doing? No. I still don't understand some of the things he's doing in my life, but he's doing them, and I trust that he's doing them for my benefit. So what's our role? Our role is to pay attention and to listen to him. In Acts chapter 16, verses 7 through 10. The apostles, it says, when they had come up to Mysia, they attempted to go into Bithynia, but the Spirit of Jesus did not allow them. So passing by Mysia, they went down to Troas, and a vision appeared to Paul in the night. A man of Macedonia was standing there, urging him and saying, "Come over to Macedonia and help us." And when Paul had seen the vision, immediately we sought to go on to Macedonia, concluding that God had called us to preach the gospel to them. They wanted to go in the Mysia and preach the gospel, to spread the word, to do what they were called to do. They were commanded, go forth into all the world and preach the gospel. Going into Mysia to preach the gospel is a good thing to do, right? Like anytime you preach the gospel, it's good. But God said, no, don't go in there. It doesn't say why. Maybe there was something going on in there that would have hindered them or whatever, or maybe it was just that once they got into Mysia, they wouldn't have been able to come out and go to Macedonia so easily. I don't know. But sometimes we can get caught up trying to do the work of God, trying to do the things that we know he wants us to do, and ignore when he actually tells us what he wants us to do. Preaching the gospel is good. Going into Mysia, preaching to people that don't know the gospel, it's good. But it's better to listen to God and follow his direction and to go where he calls you to go. In Proverbs 16:9 it says, "A man's heart plans his way, but the Lord directs his steps." I might feel a call in my heart. I might feel like I'm called to go to somewhere else and start up a church. I'm not saying I do, but let's pretend. But if God isn't actually telling me, Justin, go over to Flagstaff and start a church, then I better not go to Flagstaff and start a church just because I want to go to Flagstaff. I might plan my way, but I need to let the Lord direct my steps. I've made many plans and God has laughed at 99.8% of them. He's always directed me to something other than I wanted to do. And it's been better. When I listen to him, things go well. When I follow my own steps, not so well. When Israel was first told, send Benjamin to Egypt with us so that we can get more food, because he said, we won't see him again unless we bring Benjamin. His heart said, no, not a chance. Are you crazy? But by this point, he had started to learn. Trust in God. Follow him. He's going to do what he says he's going to do. So he let God direct his steps, and he sent Benjamin in. And look how it worked out. They got more food, but more so than that, he got his lost son back. And they got moved into the good land, to where God is going to prosper them and make a great nation of them. They went to Egypt as 70 people. 70 people in the household of Israel. By they come out, they're going to be a legit nation. A strong nation. A nation of people who've been working hard physically for 400 years. So that when it comes time for them to go into all the other lands around the promised land and make war and take the land for themselves, they're not going to be a bunch of softies. They're going to be people who know truly what it is to serve. and also who have a little bit of motivation not to ever go back to that. We need to seek after God as our strength and as our rest. My favorite verses in the Bible is out of the book of Isaiah. That's why my son is named Isaiah. And I've always skipped over the verses leading up to it, but I didn't today, so here they are. Isaiah 40, verses 27 through 31. Why do you say, O Jacob, and speak, O Israel? My way is hidden from the Lord. My just claim is passed over by my God. Have you not known? Have you not heard? The everlasting God, the Lord, the creator of the ends of the earth, neither faints nor is weary. His understanding is unsearchable. When you feel like God doesn't see you, when you feel like, hey, God, I'm down here. What, have you forgotten about me? There's some crazy stuff going on down here. He hasn't forgotten about you. He hasn't grown weary. He hasn't grown tired. He is everlasting. He's the Lord. He is the creator of the ends of the earth. He doesn't faint. He doesn't grow weary. We can't understand him. So when we ask God, this crazy stuff happening, what's up? We just have to trust that he's God. He gives power to the weak. It's a good thing because I'm pretty weak. And to those who have no might, he increases strength. Even the youths shall faint and be weary, and the young men shall utterly fall. But those who wait on the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up with wings as eagles. They shall run and not be weary, and they shall walk and not faint. Now I look back, when I was in Afghanistan, I was 19 years old, young Marine. I was that youth. I could run, I could do all kinds of stuff. I used to be able to do 6 one-arm pull-ups. Can't do any pull-ups at all anymore. But even then, at the peak of my fitness, the peak of my strength, make me run 3 miles like I had to because it was what we did. I got tired at the end. I got tired well before the end. Even when I could run 3 miles in 20 minutes, I was tired for those 20 minutes. Send me out on a long hike, carrying all my gear. I got pretty faint. But when I used to go out and run on my own, I'd run from our tent site to our work site. I'll repeat this verse to myself. And I'm not saying that this is a magical thing. Oh, you quote the Bible while you're running and you'll never get tired. No, I still got tired. But focusing on the Lord in the midst of it took my mind off that I hate running and this sucks. Instead, I was focused on the goodness of the Lord. And it made it easier to be strong. When we go through the trials of life, whether they're a physical trial like running, or whether it's just going through hard times, we lose a loved one, we lose a job, we get injured. I mean, I broke my hand in a car accident, and I'm right-handed. That was my right hand I broke. That was no fun. If we rest on the Lord, if we use him as our strength, if we rely on him instead of on our own strength, he will hold us up. He will give us the endurance to carry through it, whether it be physical, mental, spiritual. If he's our source, he's unending. He doesn't run out. And Isaiah 41:10 says, "Fear not, for I am with you. Be not dismayed, for I am your God. I will strengthen you. Yes, I will help you. I will uphold you with my righteous right hand." God is with me. I've got nothing to fear. I can go into my job and know, even if I do get fired, God's going to be with me. And he's been there for me in the past. When the trucking company that I drove for last went out of business and I came off the road, he provided a month and a half of money that I wasn't expecting. Like literally, there was no other explanation for why a college I attended 2 years prior would call me and say, "Hey, by the way, we accidentally took too much money off of your Pell Grant. Here's a refund." And that it was precisely a month and a half of pay that got me through till I got my first paycheck at my new job. Or my mom received a check from a class action lawsuit right as she was looking to buy a new car so that I could have the old car. Got a check that covered the exact cost of the car, tax, title, license, and tank of gas. And you look at these things and like, oh, they're just coincidences. No. If it was every once in a while, okay, maybe, but I know too many people, too many examples from my own life to believe that it just happens. Fear not, for I am with you. If my God is for me, who can be against me? What have I to fear? Why should I ever worry about anything ever again? Even when I grieve, I can rest on the Lord and He will get me through. He will hold me up. And a lot of people's favorite verse, Philippians 4:13, they forget the rest of it. Paul writes to the church in Philippi, "Not that I am speaking of being in need, for I have learned in whatever situation I am to be content. I know how to be brought low, and I know how to abound. I know in any and every circumstance I have learned the secret of facing plenty and hunger, abundance and need. I can do all things through Him who strengthens me." That was another verse I used to use when I was running, because I hate running, obviously. But I never really paid much attention to the context until much later. It's not saying, oh, if I trust in the Lord, if I walk with God, if Jesus is my strength, I can do anything. I can jump from here up onto the roof of the church. I can go and get this job. I can, that's not at all what it says. It says, no matter what situation in my life I'm in, whether I have plenty or nothing, whether I am walking down Easy Street or I'm climbing the side of a mountain, struggling to get by, no matter what I'm doing in my life, no matter what situation I'm in, I can be content in that situation. And honestly, isn't that what we all want? I mean, the last words of John D. Rockefeller allegedly were, "If only I'd made a little more money." The richest man to have ever lived at that point, at least that we actually could count, wanted a little more. Howard Hughes, super wealthy, died in a hotel with tissue boxes on his feet, deathly afraid of germs, hadn't been out of his hotel room in years at that point. They had abundance, they abounded, they had everything that they could have ever wanted, but they didn't have contentment. They didn't have what truly counted. They were not happy men. There's a video that I've downloaded of a guy down Costa Rica, I think he was. And he literally had nothing. He had his pickup truck, and he sold coconuts, I think. And this guy came down and had talked to him a few times. He was a believer, and he ended up raising a bunch of money secretly. He didn't tell the guy because the guy didn't have internet, so it's pretty easy to keep it from him. And raised a bunch of money, bought him a new truck, because his old truck was dying, bought him a house that had room for him, his daughter, and his grandkids to come and stay in. And the man was perfectly happy without, and he was just as happy with. He understood this verse. He was content just to be a dude on the side of the road with a beat-up truck and no house. And he was content to be a dude with a nice truck and a house. God strengthens us for His purposes, not our purposes. That's almost a misspeak. I can do all things through Him who strengthens me. But what are those things? They're His purposes. If I rely on Him, I can step up. I can talk to all of you guys about the Bible. I'm not a public speaker. I don't like it. But it's not up to me. It's not on me to do this. God is making it possible. If we rest on Him, if we allow Him to supply our strength, we can share the word, we can share the gospel with the people around us. Even if they laugh at us, even if they say, yeah, you're crazy Jesus freak, get out of here, I don't want to talk to you no more. We can still do it, and we can deal with the fact that maybe this guy doesn't want to talk to us anymore. Gotten slightly off track, but it's all right. The last slide I have was from a song I was listening to yesterday. And of course, now I can't even remember what the song is. Your Love Defends Me, that's the song. It's right there in the chorus. He says, you are my joy, you are my song. You are the well, the one I'm drawing from. You are my refuge, my whole life long. Where else would I go? Surely my God is the strength of my soul. Your love defends me. Your love defends me. And when I feel like I'm all alone, your love defends me. Your love defends me. Day after day, night after night, I will remember you're with me in this fight. Although the battle, it rages on, the war is already won. I know the war is already won. If I'm resting in the Lord, if I'm drawing on His strength, if He's renewing my strength, if I know that He's with me, if I'm comfortable being held there in His righteous right hand, if I am drawing on His strength, then all these things apply to me. If I'm drawing from Him, He is my refuge. He is my strength. He's fighting the war for me. It's a good thing because our enemy, he's a lot stronger than we are. He's been at it since humanity has existed. And a little bit before that, for that matter. He knows. I mean, we don't know how long Adam and Eve were in the garden before the fall. But He figured out exactly how to trick them. They're the first of their kind. Satan had never seen people before. And it didn't take him long to figure out how to trip us up. And he's been perfecting it ever since. So if we rest on the Lord, if we allow Him to be our protection and our strength, then He's going to fight our battles for us. He's already won that war. We just have to be on the winning side. So, yeah, that's that. Rest on the Lord. Let Him renew your strength. First one I had. Okay, I did. I just didn't look at it. I just like that picture of the eagle's wings. We got to, a long time ago, long time ago, we were out exploring Rattlesnake Canyon with Bill and with a couple other people. And as we're going along, we see a giant golden eagle is sitting on a rock. It's right at the edge of the trail, and we said, oh, that's cool. But as we approached, he just kind of hopped off the rock and started waddling away. We said, well, that's different. You're an eagle, you're supposed to fly. And it turned out he was a sick eagle. But we got to catch him, wrapped him up in a sweatshirt, because even though his talons were worn down, he still had clamping pressure. And I'm telling you, this guy, they're bigger than bald eagles. But his head was this big, and his wingspan, when he spread it out, was bigger than mine. When the Bible uses the imagery of soaring on wings like eagles, eagles are great, powerful birds. They pluck goats off the side of a mountain, drop them off the cliff, and kill them that way. They face off against honey badgers, and nobody faces off against honey badgers. Even lions don't like to fight with honey badgers. But an eagle will stand up against a honey badger. if we take anything away from Joseph's life, anything at all, let it be for us to rest on God so we can soar high above all of our problems. We can look down and see the problems and not be affected by those problems. Because when we have problems and we're just lost, we're despairing like everybody else in the world despairs. It takes away from our witness. And when we lose someone, we grieve for that person. We're sad. There's no stopping that. But we don't have to despair. And we'll finish up Joseph's story probably next week, maybe the week after. But that's really what I take away from Joseph, is a man who followed after God no matter what, and no matter what troubles he went through. He didn't despair. He didn't let them get to him. That's an example of that. Very good example for us, especially today. Lord, I thank you for bringing us all here together today and giving us your word, for giving us Joseph's example, for giving us your promises, Lord. I thank you, Lord, that you are not a God, but you are God alone. None can stand before you, and yet you stand with us. I pray that you would keep your presence, keep your might at the forefront of our minds as we go through our lives, as we go through struggles and trials and temptations and bad times, but also, Lord, as we go through jubilation and good times and happiness and triumphs. And that, Lord, we would praise you through it all. I pray that you would keep your hedge of protection around us as we go out this week. That, Lord, we would be a strong witness before the people around us at work, at home, in the stores, anywhere that we go. In Christ's name I pray.